Nah, it should be in the cloud. I should be using Google. Um, Keynote, alas. I'm Guillaume Aubuchon, the CTO of Digital Film Tree. Some of this presentation's old, some of it's new. There'll be a quiz afterwards on what's new and what's old, and who's seen what, and who's seen not so what. I don't know. We're a post-production facility. Been a post-production facility for 15 years. Moved into software development about 5-6 years ago. That's sort of our background, and then have been moving into cloud workflow. In fact, most of what we do right now, all the television shows we do, all the feature films we do some aspect of cloud. We either do private cloud, we do public cloud, we do a combination of the two, we do hybrid cloud. We do virtually every workflow we do, some piece of that is done on cloud, simply because we have to. It's becoming a necessity of the business. So one of the things that really drove this for us was, unfortunately, this is a youth-oriented business. So even though studios sometimes don't want to acknowledge it, the creatives they hire to do shows keep getting younger and younger and younger. So a lot of those creative professionals were coming to us and saying, hey, why don't I have the same access I have to my professional content as I do to my personal content? And a lot of that's about accessibility. You have a group of people that want to do things and view content and view media and view media that they're working on and collaborate with others in real time wherever they're at. So mobile, accessibility, whatever you want to call it, they want access to their content. And that's true of the professional today and the prosumer. So they're sort of becoming one and the same for us. That really drove the sort of transition to cloud for us. The other thing, just speaking as a post-production facility for a second, we're expected to compete with shows that may be shot in any continent in this great world. So we're expected to do dailies, transport material, support production, support editorial, support the post-production process in a copious amount of continents: Asia, Africa. It's exploding all over the world, and we have to remain competitive. And I don't know how to do that without cloud workflow. So that's just me, unless I hire thousands of people and boot up thousands of offices around the world. So, along with that, we're expected to interact with other clouds. This business is becoming more diverse. Every project we work on, it used to be, 10 years ago when I first got into this business 15 years ago, we'd work with one visual effects vendor, and now there's 4 visual effects vendors that are on the same project, 5 visual effects vendors that are on the same project. Same thing with production. Sometimes we're interfacing with multiple productions, multiple units that are being shot by multiple people around the world. So whether you want to call them clouds or not, those are all clouds, those are all pieces of storage, and we need to link all of those together in some secure way that allows us to transport material. So we really started looking at OpenStack as a way to sort of unify this for us about 3.5-4 years ago, as a way for us to sort of tackle our in-house storage problem initially, grow our software business, but also as a sort of open source platform for us to interact with public cloud vendors and with other vendors in the media and entertainment industry as sort of a baseline for us to all play in the same field. So a brief history of OpenStack implementation for us. We started putting OpenStack in by pieces in our software in 2012. We did a complete integration of our software and post-production 2013. And then really 2014, 2015, we started to do every single show we do on object storage. We use Swift object storage out of OpenStack. We started to use multiple nodes of object storage to actually in container sync to transport material between shows. So from off-site productions into editorial, back into the facility. So really full bore through and through, started to use compute for rendering. So we started to really build all these pieces into our workflow, 2014, 2015. And it led to, we actually did our own custom implementation of OpenStack called ProStack, which is tuned for media. And that's what we used on Luna as a proof of concept, and then honestly started rolling it out into real live productions that we were working on. So, the pillars of cloud for us is really all around accessibility, right? So access everywhere. You want access into that last mile everywhere you are. Instant access to that content. Instant access is also a security proposition for us because we can instantly grant access to material and then we can instantly remove access to that material. People get fired all the time. Logged access to that material, so we're logging everything in and out. And I think a lot of security, particularly cloud security, is talked about in terms of best practices, and that's true. But so much of good cloud security is about vigilance, and I think that's something we've really lacked, particularly in this industry. Is we can implement best practices, but the best practices in terms of cloud security is about being vigilant about who has access, when they have access, how long they have access, and how much material they have access to. So I think things are set up, and then nobody looks down the deep dark hallway anymore. And then obviously encrypted access. So best practices, cloud security in terms of that. In about 4 months ago, we were approached actually by the OpenStack Foundation to do a proof of concept around identity federation. And federated identity touches on so much about cloud, but not to overstate things, federated identity is the true deliverance of what the cloud can be in its ultimate form. What federated identity in this proof of concept delivers us is the ability to scale workloads between private instances of storage, private instances of compute, public instances of storage, public instances of compute, completely programmatically. So I don't have to have a prior relationship. I can, and this is exactly what we did on a television show called Unreal, is we went to HP Cloud, big OpenStack cloud provider, public cloud provider, and went to Blue Box, which is a slightly smaller private cloud provider, and included our own cloud, and we were able to scale those compute workloads out, those object storage workloads out entirely programmatically. So using software-defined networking to open up those pipes automatically, granting and authenticating access into my object storage for their compute resources, into their object storage for my compute resources. So really using a series of security mandates and efficiency mandates, and really intermixing private and public to optimize both efficiency and security. So really, federated identity brings you the best of cloud, the efficiency of public cloud, the security of public cloud, the security of private cloud, the efficiency of storing large data in private cloud, because public cloud's not quite there yet in terms of a financial model for that. So really, it's the best practices of all worlds. In addition to security, federated identity allows you to not only monitor security in a much more refined fashion, but to actually change the identity provider. So one of the big problems with security as it stands right now is you have one single authentication point. I know who you are, and you authenticate against a point. But that point of authentication is a point of vulnerability. So with federated identity, I can actually move where that authentication occurs in real time. So I can actually start to even diversify who has authority to give authority. So really, you start to get a multiple tiered layer of security through federated identity, as well as instant scalability. So really and it worked. I should point that out. It actually worked. Not quite there yet, but about a year and a half, OpenStack federated identity will truly allow you to have private and public instances communicate with one another programmatically. So a big part of obviously making federated identity work, making cloud workflow function in general, is metadata centralization and assimilation. So one of the ways we deal with data is to not have it be a standalone piece of data, but conversely, not enforce practices onto a production that they're not used to doing. So taking existing data that a production or post-production process is generating or a pre-production process is generating and automatically associating that with data. So through a combination of databasing and ontology mapping and so forth and so on, really building a web of metadata around assets and around objects. So in an object storage, inclusive of metadata that's living in the storage itself, and then a database that's running against that storage, specifically a NoSQL database that's running against that storage. So really building a web of information around that file, because we want to know how relevant that file is, whether it's relevant to the process we're currently doing, or as we get into archive, whether it's relevant to keep long term. I mean, there's so much that can be gained by just looking at the information as it's currently provided and building a web of understanding around that object. So in the last Luna project we did, we had 4 main software vendors, Sync on Sync, Synchronized Pix, and Critique, which is our software, sort of really beginning this process of okay, we have a centralized cloud, we all talk on the same federation level, on the cloud level, but let's get down to how we talk on an API level between different pieces of software. I think this is an important point, especially for studios as we emerge into this new world. To touch on Eric's point, every workflow is a framework of existing pieces that are put together in hopefully the best practices for that current project. And it's sort of on us, those of us that develop software, to ensure that there will be other pieces of software we have to integrate with, and we can integrate with them. And one of the important pieces about speaking a common cloud language, especially through Federation, is that I don't necessarily need, although it'd be great, API hooks into every other piece of software that's on a current project. But at the very least, we need to be able to exchange data and information in some way, shape, or form. So we can accomplish that through several different ways. And on Luna, we did sort of accomplish that in several different ways, even if those pieces of software were not quite ready to be truly integrated. So, one of the basic tenets of this is just an open framework that allows for, a third-party API to query a database and then get information out of that database. And in fact, one of the ways we've been incentivizing working with other pieces of software, and the ETC has been incentivizing working with other pieces of software, is that if you're a vendor or a piece of software that's working on a project, it would be great, instead of duplicating information, to know that information exists and have you pull that information down. So one of the things this framework concept from the ETC really seeks is that I don't want to have to duplicate information, I don't want to have to replicate information. I just need to know that that information exists in a place that's common, and I can pull that information out to my benefit. So it's a way to benefit the production in centralization of metadata, but also a way to benefit the individual vendors who are participating on that project by them getting access to information that they previously would not have access to. So as Eric stole my slide, on Luna and this past Luna and the next Luna, one of the key things, one of the simple things we can do is do a SHA-256 hash of that original camera file and use that as a unique identifier in the header of every subsequent file. So every proxy that's made, every visual effects that comes from that original camera master, we're baking in that parent-child relationship. So we always know the origin, and we always know where we came from in that file, which is so key, especially when you start building metadata association into that. So really, universal identifier based on that SHA hash of that camera file, so that can never change. Basic cloud workflow. This is all pretty self-explanatory. Shoot, you do that initial media acquisition and ingest. You make that SHA-256 hash on set of that original camera file. You do a checksum verification based on that SHA-256 hash, and that gets injected into proxies and so forth and so on as they go into editorial, as they go into viewing files. You do that metadata association. So you take all the files that came in the same day with that file, and you make as many associations as possible. I think one of the things that's frustrated me to no end is I've heard so much about speech to text, which is amazing, don't get me wrong, and facial recognition, also awesome, don't get me wrong. But if we just preserved the metadata from production, we would already know 90% of that information without building some crazy facial recognition technology to know which actors are in the scene. So really, preservation and metadata association. Obviously, granting access to that material. This is becoming a global industry. We need to transport material faster. We need to grant access to that material faster. Everything's faster, 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 and nobody wants to be in the same place. I'm an introvert too, so I don't like interacting with other people. And then what we're really seeking is some data and efficiency and analysis of that data. So through that metadata association, through all that material, really looking at some analytics on top of that. And we're here at Google. Google does analytics on crazy amounts of data that have far less organization than our industry does. So I think we can really strive forward into that through cloud. And that goes to this slide. We, in our software, and even on top of OpenStack, use a lot of open source technologies around text search and text query and building a list of known attributes to a given object. So really using search engine analytics, search engine optimization to really look through large amounts of data and then build organizations on top of it. And like I said, this industry, when you really look at all the data that's generated, that's actually pretty organized. We're actually a pretty good industry in that way when you compare to the broad public that's uploading to YouTube. So you can really do a lot by just going in and searching the data that's available. And also, Eric stole my slide. So, we can provide analytics. Not that I want to be Big Brother, but studios do, because they're writing big checks. So, really provide some analytics, especially during the production process that we haven't had access to, about shooting efficiency, and even beyond, into what's going on, what's getting done, and what's getting shot. So there are still some hurdles, although this is less true now than it was 7 months ago. Bandwidth is still a hurdle, especially last mile bandwidth. The cloud is most effective when material that is fresh and hot gets put into the cloud. So really that last mile bandwidth is still a hurdle for us. Although, increasingly we do shows, we do live productions. We can pretty much find a co-location anywhere in this great world for you to upload content, camera content with a big fat pipe to our cloud. So that's becoming less and less of an issue. Connectivity readiness. So this goes back to the vendors that participate. Some vendors are more ready to be connected to other vendors in this sort of collaborative world that we work in than others. That's also slowly shifting. That includes software vendors and post-production vendors and production vendors and all these people that are just, are they ready to be connected in and to participate in the process as it currently stands. Personnel, this is a training dynamic. We're in a transition phase right now. Some personnel on a show are ready to participate in cloud workflow, and others are not ready, and others are violently opposed. So it's a transitioning world, and we're getting through that through training and a lot of the things we have to do on every production that we take in, where we have to really train people, explain to them what it is, or we just go with the "it's magic, don't worry about it" explanation, and show them the benefits of it, and really train them about what it is, what's happening, and how it makes their lives better. And power to process. So this is really a compute dynamic. There's a little glitch in cloud right now. I'll call it a glitch, where the type of compute that's available on cloud platforms is less tuned for the specific processes that we need to run. Storage is pretty easy. A file is a file is a file. Software-defined networking is pretty straightforward in terms of that. Compute takes a bit more at this point, even with OpenStack, to really get it over the hump, get it into a shape or form that we need it to perform our processes. So that's a little issue right now. Metadata duplication. So this is something I already touched on. This is a big problem. So because we're so bad at curating that original metadata, that inevitably we end up with any production we do having a lot of duplicate metadata. And the more duplicate metadata we get as a result of people not having access to metadata, the worse the quality of the metadata gets. So we end up with a lot more metadata that's duplicate and slightly more wrong than the set that came before it. So it's a big problem right now, and hopefully as we get into a climate of preserving as much as possible from the origin of the process, that will slowly diminish and go away. Thank you very much.
So on Luna, we used 256 hash. We're kind of streamlining that process now, focused on a 512. And actually, Josh is going to come and speak about that next. And then after that will be Chris Chen talking about how you craft some of those parent-child relationships in the future. But we really do see federation and identity management, or being able to give access on a federated level, as the next step. And so I'm working on getting the security team back together and working on some basically plans to move forward toward that way direction. Do you want to?